Pray for me. The 14-year-old boy who killed both parents walked to church at midnight to pray. This is a true story of Trevor Lee, a 14-year-old boy who killed his parents in Florida. At 12:17 a.m., a 911 dispatcher in northern Florida answered a call that didn't sound like an emergency. There were no screams, no chaos, just breathing. Shaky, controlled, almost rehearsed. Then a boy's voice said quietly, "I think I did something bad." The dispatcher asked his name. "Evan," he replied. "Can you pray for me?" He wasn't calling from a house. He wasn't hiding in a closet. He was sitting alone on the front steps of a church, nearly a mile from his home. Barefoot, still wearing pajama pants. Behind him, the large wooden doors of Grace River Community Church were locked for the night. The parking lot was empty. Streetlights hummed overhead. Crickets filled the silence between his breaths. The dispatcher kept him talking. "Evan, what happened?" A long pause. "I shot them," he whispered, "my mom and dad." At first she thought it was a prank. He sounded young. Too young. "How old are you, Evan?" 14. He told her he walked from his neighborhood in Westbrook Estates. He said he didn't run. He didn't rush. He just walked. When deputies were dispatched to the address he provided, what they found inside the home would later be described in court as deliberate. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle that spilled through the house. Just two parents in their bedroom, both shot while asleep. Investigators would later say it appeared planned. Back at the church, the dispatcher stayed on the line. She told Evan deputies were on their way. She told him to remain seated and keep his hands visible. "Are they going to point guns at me?" he asked. "They've been told not to," she said gently. "Just stay calm. Take a deep breath." His next words were quiet. "I asked God to forgive me, but I don't know if he will." When deputies arrived, Evan didn't resist. He didn't cry. He didn't try to run. He placed his phone on the concrete beside him and raised his hands. Body cam footage later showed him looking smaller than his age, pale, detached, as if the night hadn't fully registered. Inside the patrol car, he asked one question: "Are they really gone?" The case stunned the community. Neighbors described the family as active in church, stable, normal. Evan's father worked in logistics. His mother was a dental hygienist. There were no prior domestic disturbance calls to the home. No police history. But as detectives began pulling digital records, a different picture began to form. On Evan's laptop, investigators found a document titled simply Plan. It wasn't long, but it was structured. Times, noise considerations, which floorboards creaked, where the safe key was kept. The document had been created 3 weeks earlier and edited the night before the shooting. Search history revealed phrases like, "How long does gunshot residue stay on hands?" "What happens if you're 14 and commit murder?" "Can minors get life in prison?" There were also searches about heaven, forgiveness, sin, and one phrase repeated twice: "Can God forgive anything?" At school, classmates described Evan as quiet but intelligent. He played video games. He kept mostly to himself. Some said he had been grounded recently for sneaking out past curfew, but nothing that screamed violence. Nothing that explained execution-style gunshots while his parents slept. During interrogation, Evan initially confessed, calmly, methodically. He said they were too controlling. He said they were going to send him away to a behavioral program. He said he felt trapped. But then, almost as quickly, he stopped talking. His attorney entered the picture, and suddenly the story shifted. At his first court appearance, Evan stood in an oversized suit, shackled at the wrists and ankles. He pleaded not guilty. The courtroom murmured. Prosecutors announced they believed the murders were premeditated. They cited the digital document, the online searches, the timeline. Defense attorneys argued something else entirely. They claimed Evan had been experiencing severe psychological distress, that he had shown signs of depression, that there were pressures inside the home The public didn't understand. But what truly unsettled investigators wasn't just the planning. It was what happened after. He didn't flee. He didn't hide the weapon. He didn't call a friend. He walked to church. Phone records showed he began dialing 911 exactly 11 minutes after leaving the house. During the call, he asked the dispatcher to pray with him, and she did. That recording would later be played in court, his voice breaking slightly as he repeated, "I didn't mean for it to go like that." But forensic analysis suggested otherwise. Both parents had been shot once. No erratic firing, no chaos, just precision. And here's what continues to haunt the community. Security camera footage from a neighbor's doorbell showed Evan earlier that evening, taking out the trash. Car. Normal. Hours before everything changed. In pre-trial hearings, prosecutors revealed something new. The firearm had been removed from the safe earlier that day. Not minutes before. Hours. Which meant he had time. Time to reconsider. Time to put it back. Time to choose differently. Instead, he waited until the house was quiet. Waited until the hallway lights were off. Waited until the world was asleep. And then, after it was done, he walked toward a place meant for forgiveness. Some believe he felt immediate remorse. Others believe the 911 call was part of the plan, an attempt to shape the narrative, to appear frightened, to appear repentant. Psychologists analyzing the case described it as a rare and deeply disturbing intersection of adolescence, control, and calculated violence. At 14, the brain is still developing. Impulse control is incomplete. But planning is different. The trial is expected to determine not just guilt, but intent. Was this a scared teenager who snapped, or a boy who decided weeks earlier that this was the only way out? As of now, Evan remains in juvenile detention, awaiting trial as an adult. The church steps where he sat that night have become a quiet landmark. Members of the congregation say they pray for everyone involved, for the parents who lost their lives, and for the boy who walked into the dark and asked for forgiveness after pulling the trigger. Because the most unsettling part of this story isn't just what happened inside that house. It's the calm voice on the phone afterward, a 14-year-old asking a stranger to pray. Not before, after. The trial. The courtroom was silent the first time the 911 call was played. Not the kind of silence where people shift in their seats. The kind where no one moves at all. Jurors leaned forward as the audio filled the room. A teenage boy's voice, controlled. "I think I did something bad." The dispatcher's calm tone followed. And then the words that would define the entire trial. "Can you pray for me?" Evans sat at the defense table, expression steady, hands folded. He didn't look at the jury. He didn't look at the screen when photos of the home appeared. He didn't react when prosecutors described the bedroom scene in careful clinical language. But when the recording reached the moment where the dispatcher said deputies were nearby and had been told not to point their guns at him, something flickered across his face. Not fear, recognition. The prosecution built their case around one word: deliberate. They showed the jurors the digital document recovered from Evan's laptop, the one labeled Plan. Enlarged on a courtroom screen, the bullet points looked almost academic. Timelines, notes about noise levels, observations about which stair steps creaked. One entry read, "Wait until after midnight, they sleep heavier." The state's attorney paused before reading it aloud. The jurors didn't. They stared at the screen. Next came the search history. Questions about gunshot residue, sentencing for minors, whether 14-year-olds could receive life without parole in Florida. Then came a chilling detail investigators hadn't released publicly before trial. Earlier that same evening, Evan had searched how to make it look like self-defense. The defense objected, arguing curiosity didn't equal intent. Teenagers search strange things all the time. The judge allowed it. Because timing mattered. Every search had been made within 48 hours of the shooting. The defense strategy was clear from the start. Psychological fracture. They brought in a child psychiatrist who testified that Evan showed signs of severe depressive disorder and possible dissociation. She described emotional suppression, escalating conflict inside the home. She said adolescents can experience catastrophic thinking, believing there is no escape from a situation. She stopped short of calling him legally insane, but she planted doubt. Then the defense did something unexpected. They played the full 911 call again, not just the clips aired in the media, the entire recording. This time, the jurors heard everything. The long pauses, the shallow breathing, the moment where Evan said, "I didn't want to be bad." The defense attorney stepped closer to the jury box. "Does that sound like a cold-blooded killer?" she asked quietly. But the prosecution countered with body cam footage from inside the patrol car. In it, Evan asked, "Are they really gone?" An officer replied, "Yes." There were no tears, no collapse, just a nod. Then silence. The state argued that remorse after the fact does not equal innocence, not erase planning before the fact. The most pivotal moment of the trial came on day 7. Forensic analysts testified that the gun had been removed from the safe at 5:42 p.m., hours before the shooting. They showed fingerprint evidence indicating Evan handled it long before midnight, which meant he lived inside that house for hours, knowing what he intended to do. Had dinner, walked the dog, said goodnight. That detail shifted the room. Because impulse lasts minutes, planning lasts hours. In closing arguments, the prosecutor stood directly in front of the jury and said, "He didn't snap, he scheduled." The defense responded with something equally powerful. They displayed a photo of Evan from just 6 months earlier, braces, school hoodie, holding a science fair ribbon. "He is 14, his attorney said. 14-year-olds are not finished becoming who they are. Deliberations lasted 9 hours. When the jury returned, the courtroom filled beyond capacity. Reporters lined the walls. Family members gripped tissues. Evan stood as the verdict was read, guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. There was an audible breath pulled from the room, not a gasp, not a cry, just air leaving lungs, all at once. Because the next question mattered more. Would he be sentenced as an adult? Weeks later, during sentencing, the judge spoke directly to him, and old enough to understand permanence. He was sentenced to life with the possibility of review after 25 years. Not freedom, but not absolute finality either. Outside the courthouse, debate erupted nationwide. Was this justice? Was it tragedy? Could a 14-year-old truly comprehend the weight of what he did? Or had something inside him fractured beyond repair long before that night? The church steps where he made the call remain unchanged. No plaque, no memorial, just concrete warmed by Florida sun. Members of the congregation say they still remember the patrol cars that night. The blue lights reflecting off stained glass. The boy sitting alone beneath the cross. Some say the most disturbing part isn't the violence. It's the calm, the walk to church, the request for prayer, because forgiveness is something you ask for before you act, not after. And somewhere between midnight and sunrise, a 14-year-old made a decision he can never undo. The question that lingers isn't whether he pulled the trigger. That's settled. The question is when he truly decided to, and whether anyone could have seen it coming. Let's look inside the mind of a 14-year-old. Long before the gun was removed from the safe, long before the 911 call, the real story may have started in silence. Psychologists who later examined Evan didn't begin with the crime, they began with patterns. Teachers described him as intelligent, but emotionally distant. He followed rules, rarely smiled, rarely argued. When other students reacted emotionally, Evan observed, not cold, just contained. There's a difference. Adolescence is a volatile period. The brain, especially the prefrontal cortex, is still developing. That's the area responsible for impulse control, risk assessment, long-term consequences. But here's what unsettled experts. Impulse doesn't create spreadsheets. Impulse doesn't map floorboards. Impulse doesn't wait for midnight. Which means this wasn't just neurological immaturity. It was layered. In interviews conducted after his arrest, Evans spoke in precise sentences. He rarely used emotional language. When asked how he felt about his parents, he didn't say angry or hurt. He said it was complicated. When pressed about the night itself, he didn't describe fear. He described inevitability. That was the only way it stopped, he reportedly told one evaluator. Stopped what? That question became central. Friends later revealed that Evans' parents were strict, structured, highly involved. Some described tension about grades, social circles, independence, nothing abusive, nothing criminal. But sometimes, in the mind of a teenager, control feels like confinement, especially when paired with isolation. Digital forensic analysts uncovered something that never made headlines. Evan had been visiting online forums centered around autonomy and escaping toxic households. Most of the content wasn't violent. It focused on emotional independence. But in private message logs, Evan once wrote, "I feel like I don't have a future unless I reset everything." Reset. That word surfaced again in therapy sessions. Experts testified that some adolescents who experience chronic emotional suppression can develop catastrophic thinking, the belief that problems aren't solvable, only erasable. And when combined with high intelligence and low emotional regulation, that thinking can become dangerous. There was another detail that troubled forensic psychologists. Evan didn't attempt to disguise himself after the shooting. He didn't flee. He didn't destroy the laptop. He walked to church. Why? One theory suggests cognitive dissonance. When someone commits an act that violently contradicts their identity, the mind scrambles to restore order. For a teenager raised in faith, church represents structure, morality, forgiveness. He may not have walked there to escape police. He may have walked there to reconcile with himself. But there's a darker interpretation. Some criminal behavior experts believe the 911 call served a narrative function. By asking for prayer, Evan framed himself as remorseful before the world even knew what happened. It positioned him not just as the offender, but as the repentant offender. That distinction matters psychologically, because remorse can soften perception. Yet during interviews, his affect remained flat, measured, no visible breakdowns, no emotional flooding. One evaluator described him as strikingly composed for someone facing irreversible consequences. Composure in adolescence after violent crime can mean several things: shock, dissociation, or calculated emotional control. There were no prior violent incidents in his history, no animal cruelty, no aggression at school, none of the classic early warning markers often associated with severe juvenile offenders, which makes the case harder to categorize. This wasn't a pattern escalating over years. It appeared contained, private, internal. Some experts believe the most dangerous psychological state isn't rage, it's resignation. When someone convinces themselves that an outcome is unavoidable, moral resistance weakens. In Evans' writings, there was no hatred-filled rant, no explosive manifesto, just structure, timing, execution. That level of cognitive organization suggests the emotional decision happened long before the physical act, perhaps days earlier, perhaps weeks, and once that internal line was crossed, everything after became logistics. The brain, especially an adolescent brain, is capable of extraordinary compartmentalization. He could take out the trash. Good night. Search sentencing laws. And still present as normal, because internally he had already rewritten the story. The most haunting psychological question isn't whether he understood right from wrong. He did. It's whether in his mind, wrong felt justified. During sentencing, when given the opportunity to speak, Evan said something brief. "I wish I could go back." Not "I'm sorry." Not "I didn't mean to." "I wish I could go back." That phrasing is revealing. It acknowledges consequence. but not necessarily motive. Today, psychologists continue to debate what this case represents. A rare convergence of adolescent brain development and perceived entrapment? A personality structure capable of extreme emotional detachment? Or a warning sign that severe internal distress can exist undetected, even in stable homes? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. No sirens before that night. No police reports. No public outbursts. Just a boy who did his homework, played video games, attended church, and quietly constructed a plan. The mind of a 14-year-old is still forming, still wiring itself. But it is also capable of imagination, and when imagination turns toward permanence, the results can be irreversible. The most unsettling part of this story isn't just that he asked for prayer. It's that he may have believed prayer could balance what he had already decided to do. And somewhere between adolescence and accountability lies a question we may never fully answer. At what point does a child become responsible for an adult decision? Because that night, a 14-year-old didn't just pick up a weapon. He crossed a psychological threshold, one that cannot be uncrossed. For more real-life crimes and story, don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends.